All right, guys, it's time for the Next Level Guy Show, a men's interview, interest, and improvement-focused podcast featuring interviews with the greats from all industries to help you better your life. Each week, a new episode features an interview with one of the greats, covering all aspects of their story, from life hacks to tips and protocols that have allowed them to live life on the next level. We then highlight concrete action steps that you can use to improve your life. And now, your host, Ian Dawson Mackay.
Today's guest is Dr. Cordelia Peel. Cordelia has been a medical doctor for over a decade, working in acute specialties including emergency medicine, trauma and stroke. Her medical training enabled her to work in South America, where she trekked up mountains, slept in a hammock and delivered medical care to local indigenous people, and also in Zimbabwe, where she carried out research to facilitate CRADLE, community blood pressure monitoring in rural Africa, detection of underlying preeclampsia, which has now taken off in over 10 countries with the purpose of reducing maternal mortality and morbidity. While Cordelia loved aspects of being a doctor, deep down she wasn't feeling deeply fulfilled or having the kind of impact that she desired. She was aware that there was something more to her and that she wasn't fulfilling her true potential in the world or living the kind of lifestyle she wanted to. As a consequence of being stuck for some years, Cordelia suffered from high-functioning depression and eventually found herself on the burnout continuum. Shortly after, she lost her 47-year-old brother to suicide. With such a stark reminder of how short life can be, Cordelia decided to take her career and her life in a new direction. Cordelia now works with achievers who are also feeling trapped, restricted or compromised in some way, and teaches them how to excel, how to become extraordinary and create ever-increasing levels of both health, well-being and external success. As a high-performance coach, her work is dedicated to helping people get their sparkle and their A-game back and achieve success while maintaining a healthy life and positive relationships. She now lives a nomadic life but plans to settle down in one of her favourite cities, Barcelona, in the near future. I would like to dedicate this episode to the memory of Dr. Peel's brother. And now, let's get to the interview. Thank you so much for coming on. I love your social media. I love the work that you do. You're helping so many people deal with stress and issues that aren't really covered in society. But for people who don't recognize your name and they're going to become a big fan of yours, can you give a quick introduction and explain who you are and what you do?
Well, first of all, Ian, I just want to thank you so much for having me on. I think being given the opportunity to speak to a male audience is something that's really, really close to my heart, considering the history that I have in terms of losing my 47-year-old brother to suicide. So thank you for allowing me to connect with men in this way. Who I am and what I do. I always find that question a funny question because I think, especially in terms of the work that I do now, we tend to answer that question in terms of what our name is and what we do for a living. And I find that a funny question. So I will tell you what I do. But who I am really is someone that really values our health, our happiness and our freedom. And I live a life really that's very much value driven. But my name is Cordelia. I have been a doctor for over a decade now, and now I am a coach. And I guess the best way to summarize what I do is to say that I help people who are feeling trapped, restricted, or compromised in some way to find their version of freedom and success.
Because I love how you mention becoming unstuck, and it's become a kind of, I like that. That's that focus point of we get stuck into our current rhythms, our current behaviors and habits, and we don't really think we can change. But was there like a turning point as a doctor that you thought, no, enough's enough. We need to start getting people, because you mentioned in your website, I think it was something like 3/4 of calls coming in are like stress related and
Absolutely.
the bad behaviors that come off it.
It's funny. So I'll talk to you about my history, but yeah, I mean, stress is a problem. And in 2016, the World Health Organization dubbed stress as the health epidemic of the 21st century. And in terms of GP visits, 70% of them are thought to be stress related. So stress is a huge problem and one that we're not managing very well. And it was one that I didn't manage very well during some of my kind of time as a doctor. So the turning point was me hitting burnout. For a long time, I was kind of on this trajectory, feeling quite stuck and quite trapped. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved being a doctor, but I knew inside of me that it wasn't my final destination, that there was something beyond that I wanted to do. But I didn't, because of fear, and a lack of self-belief and a lack of confidence, I just kind of kept going through the motions on that treadmill. Little did I know that I was going through these episodes, and I kind of thought, I was like, what is wrong with me? I'd be going through these episodes of feeling kind of down, a bit hopeless, teary, drinking too much, not sleeping well, very low mood. And then I'd come out of these episodes and think, oh, what was that about? Kind of dust myself off, crack on. Never took a day off work though, ever took a day off. And I was thinking, because I've got quite a complicated childhood history, I was thinking maybe it's to do with that. Little did I know I was experiencing high functioning depression, and this continued. And then it went on, and as I got further and further and deeper into training, doing something that I knew wasn't quite right what I wanted, and I was doing because I was fulfilling the expectations of my father and those people around me, I pushed myself further and further, and I eventually burnt out. I was on the burnout continuum, and I just became overrun by depression and anxiety. And it was at that point that I knew something had to change. And that's the problem, isn't it? I think that's one of the biggest mistakes I see people who are stuck make is, it's the one that I made, is we wait for that pain and suffering of being stuck to become much bigger than the pain of taking action, right? And it was almost like I had no other choice but to actually take some action.
I definitely feel that. I was just like, it's like she's talking about me. You could have changed our names there, and I was like, it's that moment into it. It's like, it's the worst pain ever. You fed up, you're drinking yourself, you're thinking, what's the point?
Yeah.
You're going to an empty bed or whatever it is, and you're thinking, I don't feel like I can connect to anybody. This is the end of the world. And then you have a good day the next day and go, that was just a bad,
Yeah, exactly.
We don't think it's actually a sign that we need to change. I mean, you have a great series on stress. How does it actually affect us? I mean, because obviously we need some stress in our life to grow and adapt as a person.
Mm-hmm.
But how does stress create a situation like that causes that depression? When does it become like chronic? When does it become, oh, fuck, we need to do something? How do we then start educating people to say, actually, you don't need to wait till you're about to, you're drinking yourself into oblivion, or you're doing drugs or in fights and stuff like that. How do we make people realize this is good level stress? This is back up. We need to speak to somebody like yourself.
That's a really interesting question. I mean, the thing is, stress, like you said, quite rightly, is not all bad. And we've got eustress and distress. Now, eustress is a positive form of stress. It's performance enhancing. It puts us psychologically to thrive. Distress is when we get reduced productivity, our performance is suffering, our health is going in decline, and our moods and our emotions are being damaged by it. Now, the problem is with modern living is we were basically built biologically to be able to deal with acute bouts of stress. A normal life, thriving, with acute bouts of stress. But because of modern living and the way that we work, we are chronically stressed, meaning that we're just having repeated doses of stress without any recovery in between it. And that is the problem, because when we go from acute stress into chronic stress, then we see changes at a biological level that are actually causing us damage and leading us towards disease. And I think one of the things is that we're not really taught how to manage stress. And the problem with it is like, if you learn how to, in terms of burnout, for example, one of the biggest causes of burnout is chronic stress that is not well managed. So how do we go about managing that stress? If we could reduce our stress or manage it, then we would be putting ourselves back into the thrive state. So the problem with stress is that it's the continuous doses of it, and we need to learn ways to kind of manage our stress, reduce it, and so we're not in a chronic stress state and then absolutely causing damage at a biological level.
I love it, because because that's, I think, something people say, oh man up, you need stress in your life, or it's that moment of, don't be silly, of course jobs are meant to be stressful, of course for that. But I found it interesting, like, because you were like me, you were going home hating your life, you were going home drinking and set, and no point did you think taking a day off. But I bet you went in
No,
and played the character of the version
absolutely.
you wanted to be. And I found that I was going in and I was expected to work at evenings, I was expected to work at weekends. Wasn't getting paid for it, wasn't in my contract, but to get the work done. Why do you think we've lived that as a badge of honor? Why do we feel that, like, our dads want us to do this and expect this from her? Our mom uses this to talk to her friends on the, I was about to say, in the lodge or whatever, whatever the American things are. Why, we live in a life filled with unrealistic expectations. Why can we not just stop and go, hey, look, I need help? Why is there that stigma, especially with guys, to not say, like, I'm really struggling here. I'm not living a life I want.
Yeah, I think in terms of why we do it, I think there's this big misconception, which is something that I had really challenged in myself and learned through studying other people and some of the highest performers in the world, that there's this misconception that the longer and harder that we work, that the more successful we will be. And I think that's the number one. We kind of feel like it's something we have to put ourselves through in order to be successful. And I think another reason why we do it is we tie our kind of value, our self-worth up in external things, in our job, in the amount of money we make, in our possessions. And so because we've tied our self-worth to those external things, we're pushing ourselves to build those things up so we can feel that we're valuable, that we're worthwhile. So I think there is, number one, that misconception: the longer and harder you work, the more successful you'll be. But that is just not true. Because if it was, then you've got to look at some of the most successful people in the world, and they're not all killing themselves like some of us are doing.
Yeah.
Secondly, in terms of dealing with those unrealistic expectations, I think one thing we've got to understand is that when we're trying to fulfill somebody else's expectations, and this is a conversation I really, really had with myself. My dad always wanted me to become a doctor, and I've had a troubled relationship with him throughout my life. And so by me doing what he wanted me to, by me doing what he wanted me to do, I gained some kind of love and some validation and some approval. And that felt good. But what it meant that I had to do was to kind of create a life that was successful according to his definition of success. And at never one point did I define what success meant to me and what that looked like. And not only did I have to create a life that was successful according to his success, but that also had to reflect what he valued in life and what was meaning and important to him. But then I started to question, hang on a minute, what are my values? What's important to me? What's important to the way that I live and work? What's my definition of success? What's the vision that I would actually have for my life that reflects my values? And is it aligned with what his expectations? And when I realized it wasn't, then it was time to change. I also realized that at the end of the day, there's that thing that they say, you come into this world alone and you go out alone. And nobody was going to come and save me, And so in terms of fulfilling other people's expectations, how about fulfilling my own? Am I not worth giving myself that? Am I not worth it? And when you suddenly realize that you're living this life that doesn't make you happy, and to the point where it's making you sick, you have to question that and say, is it really worth it?
100%. It's something that we need to be asking more of, because how often do you find that people work every single day, they bust their gut, never see their kids, never go home, and then you see them, they'll have died, and the job will be advertised before they've even had the funeral for that person. Like, before the family can even bury that person, there's the company's looking for somebody to replace them. And you think that you give your whole life for a company that just goes, okay, we'll get the next one in. That's sad. One of my colleagues recently passed away. He got 4 lines in an email out. And I thought, he gave so much. He did so much more. And he probably spent hours and hours, like, of his own time doing stuff to help students and stuff. And all he got was 4 lines in an email to say, we're sorry to hear about it. And I was like,
Right.
There must be more to it. And I know we have our friends, our family, and you're meant to have hobbies outside of it and stuff, but that can be like a big burden for a lot of people, fulfilling their parental expectations, and you're saying like we
Massive
should live
burden.
life on our own terms. So how do we start putting barriers in then, just to start that, to say, look, mom, I'm doing this and this is what I want, or yes, societal, culture values says I should be arranged marriage, I should be doing that, whatever it is, but no, I'm actually going to do this. Because we have students, when I work in a university, who come
Mhm.
over, they're from like Nigeria, and it's the first time they can express themselves and come out as gay. They can't go home again because of the cultural values, but they can finally be themselves because they're away from the family, away from like their certain cultural pressures and stuff. So how can we start putting barriers in to live that life in our own terms?
That's interesting. So, in terms of when you say dealing with parental expectations, I think one of the best things I've learned is you've got to listen to their advice. You don't need to fight it, but then do your own thing, you know? And I think it's funny because I spent a long time trying to explain what I was doing and the reasons I am, but it was almost like speaking Japanese to somebody that's Indian. It's like you're talking different language. If you want different
Yeah.
things in your life, you've got a different vision and a different version of success. I realized I was never going to be able to convince my dad that what I was doing was right for me because we spoke different languages. So as I've moved forward, I've learned to listen, take what I thought was useful and kind of bin the rest and put the boundaries down. And I think that that's really, really important. And, in terms of, I really respect you, I really respect your advice, but you know what? I'm going to do it my way. And a lot of the time with him, I've said, you know what? I've got to make mistakes. I've got to do all that myself. Let me do it. This is my life, and it's my right to do it my way. And I think we find it hard, don't we, to put those boundaries down with our parents, especially because a lot of the time it turns into conflict, And I think it's about managing those uncomfortable conversations and kind of showing that you're confidently and assertively and being non-negotiable in that. We weren't put on this earth to make our parents happy, and I think so many of us get stuck thinking that that's what we're here to do, right? We were here to live our life on purpose and do what makes us happy. And I think it doesn't mean that we have to, we need to just do that. And we need to take confident steps to do that. And we don't need to over-explain ourselves.
Because I have PhD students that are like that, and they'll turn around and say, I'm doing this, this to do this in my future. And then you'll say to them, okay, but what made you want to do that? And there's always a kind of lean to, well, my dad wanted me to, and then their reason after it is always really weak. So it's what their family are pushing them into doing rather than what they're wanting to do. I always say you have to be insane to want to spend 4 or 5 years researching such a specifically tiny area to create a new piece of information, so you have to really want it, and to be doing it for somebody else. It just seems strange to me, but I had a bit of a more, I was going to say a looser mother, but that sounds really bad. Who kind of said, do your own thing, because her mum and dad were religious, so they kind of pushed them into going to church and stuff. So she always said to us, look, I don't care if you believe or if you don't believe, figure it out for yourself. Go to church if you want, and we always took that as a kind of do our own thing, follow our own mission. But I had friends who were pushed into it. Like one of the friends at school, she took away his PlayStation controllers to make him study. She couldn't even let him make a decision on how he can study for his exams because she needed to keep the virtue of, oh, my kid's the best. And, and she was doing it like a kind of, I need him to show reflected glory. And I found that really sad that she wasn't living the life that she wanted. But that's the problem, is like, how then do we say to a guy who's sitting just now going, look, I'm stressed, I'm worried, I'm terrified, drinking myself every night, but I can't talk about this. I can't, how would you start working with somebody? Like, say if we could finally get them to come and speak to you as a high performance coach, how do you start breaking down that barrier that we put in, that we have to be strong and silent, We're not to come and speak to you. We're not to admit we're failing. We're not to admit, we're not to come and do and figure it all out ourselves, because that's what a lot of guys, I don't know if you've seen that video of the girl ask, who do you speak to if you have a problem? And all the guys say, no one. I'm a guy. I figure it out myself. I have no one. I don't know who to speak to. How can we get guys to realize you don't need to be strong and silent? If you're dealing with something right now, stress, depression, whatever it is, come and speak to somebody like you to help them along this journey. How do you break that barrier? Because that might be the hardest thing, is admitting to yourself you have a problem.
Well, first of all, why? Why do we have that belief? Why do we feel that men should be strong and silent? Give me one good piece of fact or evidence that says that this is something that we should do. And then let's look at what the consequence of that belief is. Because suicide is the leading cause of death in men in the UK under the age of 50. So look at the consequence. Let's all be really, really clear of the consequences of us not talking about our problems and men keeping those things bottled up. I think when we break that down in terms of actually dealing with an individual, I think personally, how I do it is sharing my personal experience. And I think when you're vulnerable, and that's what I kind of try and do with some of my social media, is express my vulnerability, because when we're vulnerable, we're inviting other people to become vulnerable, right? So I can say, I see you, I hear you, I've been there, I've experienced this, I've lost my brother to suicide. Let's talk about this, and that kind of vulnerability in myself is inviting somebody else to break down. But I'd also ask that person that one of the questions I love asking is, if you weren't to solve this problem, if this was to continue, where do you fear ending up in 6 months, in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? Where do you think you'll be? And ask yourself that really, really honestly, and get a really clear view of what your choices today about staying silent might mean for you in 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. Is that a trajectory you want to be on?
That would hit hard, because I think a lot of us are dealing day to day. Nobody thinks what's coming. You don't think what the accumulation of it is. So what behavioural outputs do you see? Do you see people, is it drink, drugs? Do you see casual sex? Do you see violent outbursts? What are the kind of, like when you were a doctor and that, what do you see people coming to you? Obviously sort of not mentioning names and things, but do you see like a similarity? Is it drinking themselves to oblivion? Is it drugs to lose the feeling or worry of what they're doing? Is it, I don't know, like going out and putting themselves into adventurous and dangerous situations to kind of feel alive again? Or because I know, like from my point of view, I've had depression when and OCD, had intrusive thoughts. I considered it years, like a few times over the years, and in my head, I remember seeing people and they're like, "Whoa," and then I could see people opening up. I can remember a student coming to me and he was saying, I got put on depression. He was looking at the floor. And I said, I've been on them. Have you had the leg shakes yet? Have you done? And suddenly in 10 minutes, he's talking to me about how he's feeling better and how happy he is now he did it. And I think that was just a thing of saying, I'm not judging you. Like you're saying, it's open up and let them see that there is that kind of problem inside. I had Dr. Rob Kelly. I don't know if you've met him. He's an addiction specialist. Yes. And that's what he was saying is, don't tell me the thing that you're willing to admit. Tell me the thing that you're taking to your grave, that you're deeply ashamed of, that gives you this problem, that causes you to do this. And let's work on that and actually give you a life again. And I was like, whoa.
Wow.
That kind of hit home. And then when I found your kind of material, I was like, she gets it. She gets it. But
it's funny because on the no judgment stuff, because that's one of the first things I started with a new client today, and it was the first thing I've started to bring that into my first session. Really say this is a no judgment zone, and I actually tell my clients some of my lowest lows and the things that I was doing in those lowest lows, and say, look, this is where I was. So this is a space where we can really be authentic and be really, really vulnerable, and I think that that's really important.
Because I think that's the beauty into it, is like you remove that barrier of high and mighty and the client who comes and begs her help by saying, like, I've been there. Let's actually cut all that crap, the stigma,
Yeah.
the balance of power and all that, and just go, okay, this is how we're going to do it. I know because I've done this, this, and this. Have you tried that? Oh, right, okay, let's try this.
Yeah.
I love that approach. I love how you're openly will admit to them, this is how I struggled. And they'll go, oh, right, I'm doing
Absolutely.
this. There's so few people who are willing to do that. It's almost like experts are kind of taught to, they're better than us. I don't get that.
You're never really going to kind of motivate change by looking down, and I think people want to work with people that have been there and understood where they have been. And I always say to my clients, I'm your coach, I'm your mentor, I'm your friend, I'm your kind of team player, and that's who I want to be. I'm standing side by side with you, I'm holding your hand, we're doing this together, like you're not alone. And I think it was funny because even we're talking about parents and expectations. I was having a conversation with my dad recently about my coaching. I said, do you know what, Dad? I said, I'm never going to be that stiff upper-lipped coach. I said, look at the way I dress. I said, I'm bringing something different to this, to what I'm doing, and I'm going to show up as me and as a kind of person that back then I wish I was working with, that would have helped me kind of break down my barriers and really kind of connect with myself. So, but back to your question, which is a great question on, you said, what do people, how is that kind of stress showing up in people? I think we all have a vice, Ian, and I'd like to know what yours is. We all have a vice, don't we?
I think doing this podcast has probably become one of them. It's probably because
great. It's a healthy one.
It's probably because I can't relax from it. So immediately I need to be doing something, or I immediately start thinking. And the second I start thinking outside of who I'm having on, questions, I immediately start looking back and going, I did that. Okay. Made that mistake. I did that, which was borderline, probably could have got me in serious trouble. I did that, and she took that as that, and I'm like, or I did that in a relationship and I deeply regret it. It's like, no matter how small, big, legal, illegal it is, I see people kind of living in the past. I think that's probably a bad kink for a lot of guys, is because we have stuff rolling in our minds the whole time. How many kind of go, I can't talk to somebody about that. I can't say that. So we drink to kind of thing it. So maybe, do you find like the drinking, the drugs are kind of masking that inability?
It's funny. I don't think it's funny. For me, it was definitely drink and drugs. That's where I was doing it. It was funny because I was so opposites. On one side, I was eating really healthy, exercising, but on the other side, losing myself of a weekend at raves and stuff. Getting wasted. But I think of a lot of the way that I see people, that the biggest vice and the biggest way we're trying to kind of give ourselves some kind of pleasure in amongst all this pain is with food. And I think probably that's one of the most common things that I see people really sabotaging their own health and their mental health through what they eat. But equally, yes, with drink. But interestingly, not as many with my clients. I think generally they're just not looking after themselves. And the first place I see that is what they're eating and how they're looking after their bodies.
I better not jump in here because my diet is atrocious. I recently I've had like really bad. I'm kind of avoiding your eyes right now, just in case, because I had started getting really bad stomach cramps. I was going to the toilet far more than and I was like, "What is going on here?" And I thought it was an infection. Gave me heaps of different medications, didn't work. So now I've got to go in the hospital to go and get it, and to get the camera up the dark road, as I was calling it, and they were saying could be IBS, it could be inflammatory bowel disease, but it's probably caused. And he said it's probably caused by a mix of your stress and your diet. And when I get really stressed, I notice it gets considerably worse for hours. And I was thinking,
did they explain why?
Not really. And I was thinking, have I made myself physically? Have I destroyed my guts microbe? I mean, I take Yakult to try help it and all that. I was thinking, have I broken myself because of stress from work?
I feel your pain with the IBS, and I have had a history of terrible IBS. So just to explain what's happening there for you, Ian, is that when we are in an acute stress state, so when we when we see a threat we're experiencing stress, blood pressure's going up, heart rate's increasing, pupils are dilating, release of glucose into the blood so we can deal with a threat that we've got to fight off. There's insulin resistance, so that sugar stays in your blood. But what happens? So all of these things are happening. Your brain goes hyperreactive. There's improved concentration and focus. So everything in that stress response is doing what it's trying to do is to help you deal with a threat, to fight something or flight. So anything that is deemed non-essential, sexual organs, digestive processes, production of certain hormones like sex hormones, is switched off. So that's why we see digestive problems in stress, because it's being switched off. It's deemed non-essential. We don't need to digest food. We need to fight this lion that's in front of us, right? You don't need to feel sexy right now. You don't need no libido. You don't need no libido. So we're switching that off. And that's why we have digestive problems with stress, is because that's been turned off, and chronically, because you're chronically stressed. And that's why we see stuff in men like reduced testosterone, libido problems, and lots of kind of hormonal problems and hormonal imbalances, because those are the deemed non-essential stuff that our body has switched off in order to literally deal with fight or flight, because that's the stress response. Are we going to fight this, or are we going to run and get out of here?
It's time for a quick break. There are millions of potential products to buy, so how do you know which ones are worth your hard-earned money? Simple. You go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and explore those that will transform and improve your life. You'll find deals, listener exclusives, and special offers with some great companies. Recommendations are 100% honest and only on items Ian has tried or believes in. The companies showcased will make you a better man in all areas of your life. Simply go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and level up.
Because I read somewhere in one of I think it was the NHS thing, where they said people can feel fatigued from it because like the biofilm can get created in some conditions, so you can't absorb the nutrients. And I thought, yeah, okay, that makes sense, because I've had a gut health expert on before, Dr. Gamoon, fantastic, interesting guy. But something that was mentioned was that there's a pain receptor in your digestive tract, and it's the same thing that tells your brain that you're in pain. How's that linked between that and your brain? How does stress cause that kind
affect your gut? That's an interesting. I'm not sure on the whole pain receptor in your gut, but what I'm very much about is your gut microbiome. Now, your gut microbiome communicates with your brain to tell whether it's happy or not. So in terms of there being something that communicates with our brain and affects our mental health, your gut microbiome is the most important thing. Now, that is a collection of bugs, 100 trillion bugs, although some research has shown up to 300 trillion, which is yeast, bacteria, but all a collection of multiple different microbes in your gut. And they communicate with your brain in two ways. You've got a direct line of communication, your vagus nerve, and then they release chemicals to your brain. So when you're looking after your gut, when you're looking after your gut, they're telling your brain, we're happy, everything's good, and your brain is settled. But when they're unhappy, then they're releasing chemical messages which are communicating we're under threat, we're not happy. And they have a huge role in the form of the inflammation and how you're monitoring of your immune system, which then, as we know, chronic stress is linked with chronic inflammation. So your gut is a very important point in terms of stress.
That makes a lot of sense. I could actually almost visualize how, and because I can remember sitting at work thinking, I've got this to do, and I need to go here, and I need to do this, and I've got to be finished at 5 because I got to go home for a podcast, and I was like, and I could feel myself, and then all of a sudden I could feel like my stomach swirling. I could feel that, and I just thought, okay, it's just something bad I've eaten. Then you go to the toilet a few more times than then you start looser, and then you go, what? Suddenly you're going and you're 3 loads of diarrhea, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, it sounds not right here, is it?
Absolutely.
And at no point, like you're saying, do we think, what are you eating? How are you feeling yourself? How does diet then play a role? Like, what kind of, are there certain minerals? Are there supplements you want people taking? do you have golden rules on diet that you give to all new patients to say, no matter what else you do, start doing these? You're about to say take out all the fun stuff in your diet, aren't you?
No, not at all. But it's true. There's a few things going on in my head right now, and I'm going to try and. The first thing I think we've got to realise is that diet plays a huge role in our mental health. And when I coach from 4 pillars: mind, body, ambition, and relationships. And so in the body, we've got to see that what we eat can affect us both negatively and positively in terms of our mental health. In terms of what should you eat and shouldn't you eat? Well, anything that upsets our gut microbiome is going to impact our mental health and our immune system and the amount of inflammation. So yes, processed food, refined carbohydrates, sugars, the things that the fried foods are particularly bad. And I'm not saying, I talked about this recently, and I was like, I'm not trying to be a killjoy here. This isn't about leading a perfect life, right? Because we're not. We're here to enjoy life. Life is fun. But if you're eating those things consistently every day, then they're really, really going to be impacting your mental health. I mean, how do you feel after you've eaten something fried or some unhealthy meal? Do you actually feel good in yourself after you eat that? And that's what I always kind of say to my clients. How does that make you feel? It might feel good at the time, but later they'll say, I felt really slumped, or I had no energy, or I felt a bit down, or I felt a bit flat. It's like, okay, so let's do that connection. In terms of what I say to my clients that I'd like them to take: kefir, anything fermented, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi. These are packed full of those good microbes. And what's important in terms of your gut microbiome is not just the number of bugs, but the diversity. So we want lots of different types of bugs and in big numbers in order to build a really resilient gut microbiome. So I encourage that with saying, look, I personally have 250 mils of kefir every morning. I started with a new client and I was like, take your kefir. He was like, I'm already doing it. I was like, wicked. Sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, those kind of foods. But in terms of supplements, I think omega-3 is something that's absolutely, I think, important for all of us to take. We don't get enough of it. We have a lot of refined oils and vegetable oils, which are really high in omega-6, and these are really pro-inflammatory. And that's why with the fried foods, we're seeing a lot more it leads to inflammation. Omega-3 is really, really good for our brain health. It's been shown to reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety, and it reduces inflammation. So there's actually a really, really good article on it. If your listeners wanted to look up, just put Harvard Health Review and omega-3 for depression. It's a brilliant article that will walk you through it. The recommended dose on that is about 1 gram. It's about 1 gram a day. But if actually just by eating 3 pieces of oily fish a week, you could get the same benefit. So omega-3, and so that's something that I take and I recommend that my clients take. Again, this isn't medical advice, Ian. I don't need to say it. I would always say check with your doctor first. B vitamins are also something that's really, really good in terms of stress. They've shown if we take them for 3 months and they contain B12 to help with mental fatigue and really help improve our cognitive performance. Other things that I think are important are, depending on what you're suffering from, is magnesium. Magnesium supplementation can be really good to improve our sleep. Turmeric as well has anti-inflammatory properties, and if we know that stress is linked with inflammation, then taking anything to reduce that inflammation can be really, really positive. So there are lots of things that we can do, or we can eat from our natural diet to improve our health. But equally, yes, supplements are really good, and the ones I would say are the omega-3, your B vitamins, and also vitamin D. I think we always think about vitamin D as just our bone health, but oh my God, vitamin D plays a huge role in our brain health and our cognitive abilities. And a lot of studies have shown that a correlation between vitamin D levels and levels of depression. So, and we can get that vitamin D from obviously dairy products and actually being in the sunshine and things like cod roe.
It's really hard not to stop and start taking notes. I keep forgetting. I'm like, stop listening. Remember the next question. Because that's what I love about it.
My brain is just there's so many things I want to say. I mean, I'm not very good at being succinct.
That's why I love this podcast, because it's just like I'm scratching my own itch a lot of times. I'm asking about my stuff and then asking friends, and they go, okay, right, let's. So what other kind of treatments then would you advise? Like, say, would there be like golden rules? Because like my mom would always say, if you're stressed, go for a walk with a dog, because we've been outside.
Brilliant.
Calms you down, gets you going. So, like, would it be like, I mean, I struggle to sleep, so I'm assuming a lot of guys who are stressed are, not sleeping, insomnia, things like that. Is it things like uppers, just going outside walking, going outside in the sun? Like, what other kind of staple fixes do you give before you start tackling the work life balance, the
The
work
internal
life
struggle.
the work life flow, I think you call it. But what kind of staple fixes would you put in place for those listening just now?
Okay. So let's divide it by, and I always got to keep coming back to my system, which is 4 pillars of health. So in terms of kind of body, what kind of things that I would put in place? So we've already talked about nurturing your gut microbiome. And another way that you can do that and actually improve your energy levels, improve your mood, and improve your sleep is with time-restricted eating. I'm not sure if you've heard that before, but it's when you reduce your eating window to kind of 8 hours, and then for the rest of the time you're fasting. So time-restricted eating and fermented products in terms of diet. In terms of our sleep and also thinking about our mind, the mind pillar there is it's just our tech borders. And that's why your mum is so right with nature, because nature
I'm not
is
telling
the
her.
antidote to but she's right, it's the antidote to technology. When we're in nature, we're telling our brains everything's cool, things are safe, and I think we really need to really think about our tech borders. So things are, get the phone out of the bedroom. The bedroom should be for sleeping and sex. It does. You don't need to be on your phone in the bedroom, so keep it out of there. Let's think about light. Let's think about blue light, which is emitted all our devices, and creating a boundary with that. So I always do with my clients a no tech 90. So 90 minutes before bed, screens off, put them in the drawer, get them away. That's going to start allowing our bodies to settle down for sleep, improving our sleep qualities, and also technology stresses us out. Emails coming in, messaging. You don't want to see emails coming in from work at 9 o'clock at night saying, something's hit the fan tomorrow and stuff's coming off. So let's think about managing our boundaries in terms of technology. I think, and light is a really important thing. I think nowadays, in the modern world, we've got all of these unnatural lights, like the ones that are shining on my face. But when in the previous days, in evolutionary terms, we came up with the sun and we went down with the sun. And now we're living with all these artificial lights, just stressing our bodies out. We're keeping ourselves awake longer. So can we start turning the lights down? Can we be, one thing that's really, really good for night lights is red light, because they found that using red light has a lesser impact on our sleep than on the blue light being emitted from phones. So what we eat, in terms of our sleep, managing our tech borders. And another thing with sleep, I think it's important to have a cold room. And I think at the moment, in terms of all the energy crisis that we've going on, that's not bad for our sleep. We want that room cold, 17 degrees C, and we want it really, really, really dark. And it's funny, really, because relationships is just such an integral part of my coaching. And no matter what people come to me with, they'll always come into it. And I think, when we're at home, that's the time to nurture those relationships. Too often we're sat at our kitchen table eating dinner with our phones in our hands, texting, and why aren't we sitting around having real conversations and connecting with people? Because that sense of belonging and connection is just so important for our mental well-being. It's absolutely integral. And so we've got to enhance that. Let's get rid of technology and let's sit around the table and eat, or just spend quality time with people that we love.
Because not a lot of people do that, do they? You see them kind of going out for a meal with friends and they're all sitting on their phones, and you're thinking, what's the point of being out if that?
What is the point?
I mean, when I was really depressed, fed up with life, I can remember actually coming on and chatting to people online, because I felt like I could connect to people online better than I could with real friends. And then I eventually got up to the point where I couldn't put up with the crappy job I was in, the crappy friends. I had to make that move. But not a lot of people get to that point, do they? It's kind of like, it's not that bad. It could be worse. How do you get them to overcome that fear? That you can make this change. You just need to step outside that comfort zone, because we can talk ourselves in and go, yeah, but I need Candy Crane on my phone to fall asleep. Yeah, I could do this, but my job's not too bad compared to like the refugees getting lost at sea and stuff like that. We always kind of find ways to justify, to keep our bullshit as our bullshit. How do we get people to stop, who are probably arguing just now, going, oh, but I need my phone for, how do we get them to start thinking, look, life shouldn't be this way. You shouldn't be making yourself physically sick. You shouldn't be needing a drink to calm down at night. You shouldn't need to be avoiding your kids because you're stressed and you don't know how to talk to them. How do we make that first step to kind of go, actually, I need somebody like yourself. Actually, I need more from life than I'm getting, because it's terrifying.
So if I've got somebody that wants something, they've got this dream, this desire, they say something doesn't feel quite right, Cordelia, then what? But I can't do it because I'm scared. I think we need to put that fear under the microscope, and that's one of the things I always say to my clients. Let's put this under the microscope. And similar to what we were talking about earlier, it's just like the first thing I'll say is, okay, so I'll get them to list out all their fears, and I'll say to them, if we are, what is the cost of us not taking any action? Where might you be in 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? Let's get really, really clear on that. And let's think about what the physical, the emotional, the mental, the financial costs to you could be. And let's get really, really clear. And then let's think, what could be the benefit of trying? What about if we were successful in creating this change, or even had a partial success? Let's list all those benefits out. Let's get really, really clear on that. You keep doing this. This is where we think that you might be in 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 12 years. You make that change. Okay, this is what all the benefits could be and where you could be in 6 months, 1 year. And look how good that is. Then, okay, you're scared. I get that. So let's start. What are your fears? We'll list them out. Now let's look at the facts. Because I think whenever we're dealing with uncertainty, we need to focus on the facts. What do we know about that? And I think that's one thing I've really, really learned over the duration of my coaching, is not just to say to people, do this, but why. So why am I asking you to do that? What's the evidence? What's the facts behind that's supporting this action that I'm asking you to do? And then I think in terms of dealing with any kind of fear, it's exactly what I did with myself when I made this transition, and I do with clients. It's funny, I did it with a client recently and only in one session, and now I had a catch-up call with her, and she's over in Australia. That was her fear, but we did this and we set this fear and we put it under the microscope, and we say, okay, what are all your fears? What are the ways, and I learned this from Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss himself has struggled with mental health, and he talks a lot about fear setting. And we say, okay, what are all the ways that we could kind of prevent these fears from happening? What could we do to stop these things from coming into occurrence? All your doubts, your what ifs, your worst case scenarios. What actions could we take? And then I say, okay, let's imagine that all of these things came true. What could we do to repair them? And suddenly, Ian, you are building yourself a strategy for change, because you're looking at what you want, the benefits, and you're looking at, these are things I need to prevent my worst case scenarios, all these things that I'm worried about from happening. And then I have a backup plan, a plan B. If shit hits the fan, this is what I'm going to do. And I think suddenly that makes people feel in control. This gives people clarity. And actually, this gives people a really clear plan of action to kind of move forward more confidently with that change.
No, I love that. I love the Tim Ferriss approach. It's like, is it based on keto? And he would eat the harshest foods, wear the worst clothes and stuff, because he knew that if I've already lived life at the hardest, what do I need to worry about? And I think that's the thing it is. People don't realize, we say we want to do this, but there's so many things up here that could happen. So actually writing it out and looking at it and going, okay, this is what could happen or could go wrong. But what would you do if it did? Okay, I went in there and it's a crap job. Well, you can get a job back in your old hometown.
Exactly.
You could get a club, meet some friends. If you don't meet anybody in the first week, okay, I could do this, I could do that, and I could get a second job in a restaurant, waiting tables if I need some extra cash, and it's a way to meet people. There's so much more to it, and I love that approach. I love that you use fear setting, because it's not a technique you see a lot of people doing, but I think it's so beneficial. And I think that's
creating a tangible plan, isn't it? You want me to give you a tangible plan. I think people, we lose so much. Seneca says we suffer more in our imagination than reality. So we're actually, let's say, we're putting this into reality, and we're creating tangible actions and plans which make people feel safer.
And do you think this is tied then into perfectionism, where we want to be perfect in all aspects of our life? So if we're going to do a step, it's easier to talk about it and think about it and juggle it and polish it and have plans like I would do with OCD. Not actually needing to do it, but then you think, okay, that could happen, that could go wrong, and I need to be perfect before I leave. So we make these plans. So, it's like, so rather than having a plan, but actually making the first step, we want to have a plan that's absolutely perfect. There's no chance we can go wrong. But because we think we're doing something, we're not actually doing the step. So is perfectionist in that way kind of controlling us? Or is it perfectionism in
Absolutely.
terms of everything we need to do? We can never settle. We can never relax. Is it a mixture of both, perhaps?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is a mixture of both. It's another mistake that people who stay stuck make, is wanting everything figured out, every perfect detail set out before they take action. And what I always remind people of is that you're never going to have every single step laid out, are you? A lot of the
I
time,
wish.
these steps reveal themselves. We only need to really know this first one or two, and then they kind of will reveal themselves as we move through our process of creating change. In terms of, I think a lot of the time we care too much about what others think, and that's something I see come up time and time and time again in my clients, and that's where the perfectionism is coming in. A socially prescribed perfectionist really is very self-critical, cares a lot about what other people are thinking about them, worries about rejection, worries about other people's perceived standards, and that's where we see the highest cases of depression and anxieties with that type of perfectionist. And so, yes, they are going to be very nervous about creating change and failing at it. But we have to adjust our expectations. And as perfectionists, we have very high expectations. You're not going to get it right first time. It isn't going to be perfect, but at least you're doing something. You're making progress. You're stepping forwards. And, as I will explain time and time again, those mistakes and those failures are part of the process. And that's where we're going to really learn. And I've had some brilliant ones in my time. But God, those rock bottoms teach us so much more than mountaintops ever will, and I think we need to really change the way we view failure to help us move forward.
I really like that approach, because what does it they say? It's, if you are looking on, you can't have the troughs without the highs. It's like on a heart rate monitor. Once, if it's flatlined, you're never going to get everything perfect. So you're always going to have up and downs. And then if not, you're not going to be there anymore anyway. So it doesn't matter. And I really like that idea. I always think, like, when I'm in a low, this will pass. It's like, I think Tom Hanks said it. He said he wished he'd been told, this too shall pass. Whenever you're in a low,
Brilliant.
you think, this too shall pass. But in a high, everything's going perfect. You think, okay, I need to prepare for something going wrong. And then when you're between the two, he's thinking, then when he looks at his kids when they're younger, this too shall pass. So I need to enjoy it while I can. The same for everything. I just love that kind of mindset.
I love that. I love the fact that you've mentioned that quote, because it's one of my favourite, and I think it's from Eckhart Tolle, this too shall pass. And honestly, Ian, it's the thing I hold closest to my heart when I've been in some of the darkest times, because one of my truths of life is that nothing stays the same. Everything's always changing and evolving and becoming something other than it's not. So even when we are in the depths of despair, things keep moving, and just think to yourself, this too shall pass. It's brilliant that you brought that up, because, something that's very close to me.
It's really hard, isn't it, though, when you're really bad and you're like, I think back, and one of my regrets is I wasted those days. I wasted that relationship. I wasted that block of time. So you start beating yourself up. And then do you think that creates like almost like a chase for perfectionism afterwards? Or we get linked to, like, once we start feeling better or we start making this change, that we want to have the fancy car, we want to have the better house compared to this, we want our kids to be better. Does it create this kind of a desire for the best we can because we realize how much time we've wasted? So we think we need to go away and win at life, and then we tie ourselves into processions and stuff, and then we lose our own value. Is it that kind of roller coaster, or am I reading too much into it?
Well, that's an interesting, in terms of beating yourself up, but is it a waste of time? I would be challenging that. Did you really waste your time? Are you telling me that you got nothing from that? You took no value from it. You didn't learn everything from it.
If you met my ex,
grow and develop as a character. Oh, God. And I think in terms of using that past healthily to motivate you for change, and I get that. But I think when we get stuck in that kind of rumination and that beating ourselves up, that self-deprecation, that's when it becomes unhealthy, because it's not generating anything positive. So I think it's about using those past mistakes, failures, places where we felt short, looking at what they gave us, what value we've got, what we can learn from them, and then trying to use that to propel us forward. And in terms of just responding to those things, well, I'll get a better car, I'll get a better this, I'll get a better that is dangerous, because that's tying your self-worth and your feelings of happiness to external things. And that's a dangerous game to play, because once those external things are gone, your self-worth and your happiness plummets, right?
Yeah.
So I think actually it's kind of using those past kind of experiences to motivate change moving forwards, and to really define what you want, what you don't want, what you stand for, what you won't stand for. That's how I would use those kind of experiences.
That really hit home, because I was thinking of how I was judging myself against other people's cars or what I would achieve. And then if somebody did better than you, you would knock yourself out because you were like, well, I'm worthless. Why can't I do that? How can they, just started competing in jiu-jitsu and they're winning gold, and I can't even talk myself up into competing because I'm not scared that I might make a fool of myself. It's like, I can remember wasting time on this drivel, and I still get it now. Despite all these amazing things I've done in life and stuff I never thought I'd get to do, like skydives and all this kind of stuff. And I'm now looking back and going, why am I bothered by that? Why is our society set up that it's the pursuit of material goods? And it's really sad. I mean, and I love how you mention in your stuff about how we're working against our own biology. That there is no such thing as work balance. What is it? You said work-life balance is a myth. Instead, it should be work-life flow. So
Yes.
how do we understand that we are not working ourselves to death to create the fancy trinkets that we're going to show off to our friends, that we don't need to work 24/7, and the 24/7 grind is silly? How do we get people to actually have this work-life flow that you mentioned?
That's interesting. I want to, in terms of, can I just mention a little bit about comparison? Because I think you picked up on something really important, which is one of the most detrimental things to our mental health. Comparison is a dangerous game, Ian, isn't it?
Definitely.
It's a really dangerous game, because it makes us feel worthless, inadequate. We have that whole fear of missing out. And I think that's really, and with the rise in social media and our social media use, that's becoming more and more of a problem. And it really, really generates feelings of inadequacy in us. And I think one point before we talk about work-life flow, I really want to make is, comparison is futile, because life is unfair in that way. We're all different, right? We've all got different strengths, different skills. We've all had different backgrounds, different levels of experience, different education. And so really trying to make a proper comparison is really, really very hard. So I think when we find ourselves comparing ourselves to other people, which is a major thing that perfectionists do, especially socially prescribed perfectionists, is actually trying to use that comparison, if you're feeling that somebody's in better shape than you are, rather than getting stuck in that kind of toxic emotion of envy and jealousy, is to actually use that kind of frustration to motivate you to make some positive change in your body and how you feel in your body, and trying to use that as a motivation rather than just get stuck in the comparison. So comparison is a really, really dangerous game, and I think we've got to be really, really careful of it. And, we're all different. We've all got different strengths, skills. We're all unique. We've all got something valuable to bring to the table, and you can choose to focus on the stuff that you haven't got, that somebody else have, or you can start focusing on your strengths and your skills and your value and bringing that to the table. Now, in terms of work-life flow, I think it's work-life flow. The reason I think it's really important in terms of work-life flow instead of work-life balance, because I think when we think about balance is two opposing forces. It requires two opposing forces in order to find equilibrium, right? So we're saying that work and life are two opposing things. And I think that that's creating stress in general, because when balance is a really hard thing to achieve. And I've realized that I find it very hard to find balance. When we're looking at work-life flow, what we're realizing is certain areas of our life will need more or less attention and energy at different times, right? Everything's changing. So you start a new job, you start a new business. that might need a little bit more focus for a little bit more time. That might need to be your sole focus. Perhaps your health is deteriorated and actually you need to focus on your health for a bit. Perhaps you've got a new family, you've just had a child. So the nature of our life is always changing. And so what I think is really important is that our work and life is able to flow in order to meet those needs. There should be more flow between work and life. And that's what I guess I feel very grateful for in the work that I do now, is that when I need to take my mum to hospital to have a hospital appointment and it needs to be a day like that, that's where my energy and time can be focused. And then I can flow the next day, enjoy having a day where I am just with my clients. And that's what I'm doing all day. So I think balance is really, really hard for us to achieve. And like I said, it's like saying that work is here and life is here. And if we go, and I would like us to try and bring this back into more harmony where we're flowing from one to another. So how can you create more flow in your work? How can you create more ease? How can you allow for more flexibility? And I think it is really, really hard in lots of people's works. And having been a doctor, doing 60, 70 hours a week or more, it was really hard for me to achieve work-life flow. But there are ways that I brought that in, and we just have to, we have to create kind of some structure, but also be really flexible with ourselves.
I love that. I love it because it sounds so like easy, and then you think it actually is. You need, because I think that I love that thing about we're working against our biology. We have lights to create sunlight, whereas we would have got up with the light and we'd have gone to bed when it got dark. Instead, we've created this artificial environment. We're working from home now, so I can roll out of bed and literally my office is just down the corridor. I don't even need to leave my flat to go to work. I can sit and do emails at night, and because nobody's checking in on me and saying, "Come on, why are you still there?" Because a lot of us work live on our own and stuff, and it's like we've created this nightmare scenario. I can understand why the Matrix was so popular, because we've plugged ourselves into somebody else's control. We're not doing our own thing. We're not living our own lives. We're, like you were saying earlier, we're not living. We're at work to live, but just now we're living to work, and I think that's really sad. This is going to sound a bit sort of airy-fairy to a lot of guys. Self-care. Now, women we see go and have their baths, they have their pampering sessions, they have their massages. What can you say to a guy to have a self-care routine? I know a lot of guys go, no, I'm not journaling. No, I don't want to know that. I'd rather go have a drink, or I'd rather go shoot a gun, or if they're, like my brother-in-law, I'm off out doing the sheep and I'm off out shooting some foxes, or anything to avoid being in touch with his feelings. What can we do to create a routine, a self-care thing, to get mentally, physically, emotionally centered and realize there's more to life than work?
I think that's such a brilliant question. Number one, I think, which is really important for men, is solitude, is spending time alone. I think, like you said, women are really good at getting that self-care by bonding with other women and talking about their problems.
I've noticed.
I think men actually need to spend some time alone in solitude, away from the noise. Whether that's the noise of your family or the noise of your work. So for men, just time alone, whether that's going for a hike, time in nature, going out on your surfboard, whatever that kind of looks like for you. And then I would think about it again in terms of the 4 pillars. So in terms of mind, you need an active mental recovery protocol. So what I mean by that is activities that generate alpha brainwaves, which are the brainwaves of wakeful rest. And this gives your brain time to recover. Whilst you might not like journaling, there are other ways that you can get those alpha brainwaves: through meditation, through reading, through doing your hobbies and deep play. There's been a big talk about kind of deep play and us getting back into doing things that kind of like that it's all about the challenge skill balance, things that we enjoy doing, which we don't find too challenging. So think about an active mental recovery protocol, and I would be really doing something like that every single day. If you can meditate every day, but if not, then making sure that you're doing some kind of hobbies or some kind of deep play, whether that's whatever that is for you. I mean, I'm thinking painting, but obviously I'm coming up with lots of girl stuff, but that could be building something, making something, creating something. Secondly, let's talk about kind of your relationships. I think for men, it's extremely important, just like women, to bond, but I think that men bond around purpose. And so can you meet other men and spend time with other men and bonding over a shared purpose? And for a lot of that might be sports, right? Men love sports and getting together and playing golf or doing kind of something similar. That is your self-care, because that's giving you the connection and that sense of belonging that you need.
Okay.
In terms of kind of body, I think we need to, that doesn't really differ really whether you're a man or a woman. We need to move our bodies, we need to exercise. And I think one thing that it's difficult for men to connect with is they're very good at going hard and fast. And that is great. You know, the cardiovascular exercise is great for our heart health and our lung health and our insulin resistance. And also in terms of building and preventing kind of age-related muscle loss and all of those things, and lifting weights, which is great for preventing osteoporosis. But what about more gentler exercises that allow you to down-regulate your stress systems, down-regulate your sympathetic nervous system, your stretching, your yoga? I'm not saying that you should go to a yoga class filled with women, but is that something that you could incorporate more? You know, I've got a male client at the moment who's loving Pilates, and and we've built a routine where a Monday night is Pilates night, and he does 30 minutes of Pilates, and God, that helps him so much. But then he's also running 15 to 20 kilometers a week. So again, It's that something hard and fast and something kind of relaxing. So you need to think about your mind, we need to think our body, and you do need to think about connection. And I think, you know, just because I understand you don't want to journal, well, can you just meditate? You know, I use the Calm app. Can you do something that you enjoy, a hobby? Can you bond with men over a shared purpose, over some kind of shared sport? And then can you do something as well as hard and fast, like lifting weights and running? Can we do the other of that? Something stretching, something kind of mind-body connection like yoga.
I love it, because I've seen it, like, for me, I've seen what my sister, my mom, how they bond, and, you know, how friends of, like, my girlfriend and her friends used to bond and stuff. And it was like, you know, it's like all touch and hugs and, you know, spending quality time together, where guys were kind of like looking around going, fuck, what do we do here? Like, you know, how do we, and that's why I'm a big fan of like jiu-jitsu, DDP yoga, you know, because
wow, brilliant.
It's stuff that can make you go, but it can combine like meditation, some of it, but it can also do it in a cool way, you know, like with rock music. It's, you know, it's sad that we need to go, how do we make this more masculine? Like jiu-jitsu is amazing, and I'm really sad I've been signed off training for a bit, and then suddenly now I've got into my head, how do I go back? How, you know, I'm start building into my head of, oh, what if I go in and I'm bad and terrible again, and I've lost all my you know, technique? You know, immediately guys kind of going, I'm looking for problems that are there. And I think that's what a lot of guys need, is a way of kind of going, like, this is a downtime, let all that out, talk to somebody, write it out, like you're saying, meditation, let the thoughts go, because we're not dealing with it, are we? We're kind of just keeping it swirling, going in day after day after day, bringing that bullshit and increasing it, rather than actually going, actually, like you're saying, I could go and get a sport, I could do this, I could do that. This is why I wish I had somebody like you years ago, because I think when the stress and the evil side of it I put myself through, making myself physically sick. And even now, you know, I'm now going to have like two of you, one on each shoulder, the devil and the good one, going, stop that, get on with it. But what research then would you want people to do into this? What would you like people to do to kind of change society so we're working healthier? Because if this is having such an impact in the medical side, you know, and the cost and the health, the relationship damage this is doing and all that kind of stuff, what kind of research changes would you like to see getting implemented, rather than here's a bunch of depressive, you know, like antidepressants, here's some Gaviscon? There are other brands available, obviously, but, you know, what would you start implementing if you could change this on a wider scale?
I think one thing that I'm really interested in seeing more research done in is how stress is affecting us genetically. What's it doing at a genetic level? How is it going to impact, you know, our children and their children, and what's going to be the consequences of that? I think it's so, you know, creating change is really, really hard, isn't it? And especially at kind of a societal level. And I think it's interesting when you talk about what research I'd like to see being done, because somebody that I really, really respect is Professor Sanchin Panda. Now, he's a researcher in America that's done all this research on time-restricted eating. And, as a coach and a doctor, I'm constantly looking at the new research and filtering it into the work that I do. And, that's my job, really. And he was the one that kind of identified that we could be reversing things like type 2 diabetes and obesity and heart disease with restricting our eating windows. He was giving mice or rats like McDonald's and healthy food. And even when he was giving these rats unhealthy food, but in a restricted time window, he was seeing the reversal of some of these diseases. But interestingly enough, I was looking a bit back over his stuff recently, and he wanted to start doing this research in humans. And what was happening? What was happening? He was struggling to get any funding for it because, of course, there wasn't going to be any profit from it. If we were suddenly to turn around and say, do you know what? We can solve your diabetes, your obesity, and all of this just by restricting your time window. Well, the drug companies were going to be screwed then, weren't they? So nobody wanted to fund it.
It's not sexy, is it, to say you're going to lose your profit? The things that people survive on, to suddenly say, we're actually going to take away the dependent need of it. I mean, look at America. How much are they willing to give them, like, opioids and all these kind of things, like drugs that are known to be addictive, rather than saying, we're going to send you on a course to actually find out how not to blow your top. We're going to give you something that'll just keep it under the surface. I just think that's terrifying. So what advice then would you give to people with young kids or people like new fathers? How can we get them to realize like that stress doesn't need to be this way? We can live happy, healthy lives and work. What would you say to people, like, for kids, so we don't repeat our current generation's fallacies, I think?
Looking at the people around them and looking at the impact of stress having on them. Do you want to be like them? Are they happy? Are they successful? Number one. I think the way that I learned that it didn't need to be that way, honestly, Ian, was by looking at other people and studying other people. I got really heavily into books when I was coming out of that period of burnout and depression. And I was reading about these people and some of the things that they did and how successful they were, and thinking, hang on a minute, that's not, I didn't know it could be like that. I didn't know that was even a way. That's not my blueprint. That's not how I was programmed. And that's where the mindset change came, because I was like, shit, God, okay, what I've been told is a lie, and there is another way, and it doesn't need to be like this. So I think educating ourselves and research and looking at people that we admire and studying them and learning what they're doing, learning from them and the way that they're looking at things and doing things is really, really important to encourage change and show us that it doesn't need to be that way. Because it doesn't, does it? Because there are a lot of people that are living happy, healthy, successful lives that aren't burning themselves down, while there is this large proportion of us that keep doing the same thing and expecting that we're going to get a different result. And I think the statistics say it all. The statistics say that, what's heart disease is the third leading cause of death in the UK. And we know that's a lifestyle disease that's completely and look at alcohol and what alcohol is doing to our country and all of those things. And so I always said to myself, do I just want to become another statistic? No, I don't. And I need to make a choice to make a change.
Do you think that's coming from a lot of like these bigwigs who need to sound important? So when they're saying what they do, they ham it up like, I'm working 24/7, I'm doing that. Where in reality, they're not. But because there's this belief that you have to be grinding 24/7, you have to be hustling every day, that the people who are trying to get like them don't realize that the stuff that they're doing work and the stress they put themselves under isn't actually what like these bigwigs put on. Because I mean, look at Tim Ferriss, the 4-hour work week. People said, no way can you run a business doing roughly 4 hours a week. Not possible. And he's saying, well, you can if you do the systems and stuff. But we would rather believe that you're working 24/7, so it justifies what you're doing. Is there an element of kind of not understanding and kind of trying to emulate, but overexertion, and we're not actually getting anywhere because we're going too much compared to what that person's actually doing, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I sometimes think, and I thought this myself, that we think that we'll be different, don't we? Or we'll be different, we'll be better at this, or it won't affect us, or I had this thing of like, I'm invincible. And for a long time, I felt like I pretty much was. But it catches up with all of us, you know, in the long run. And I think, I think you've got to be careful who you listen to and the advice you take, you know. And I think I look at my brother and I look at that period before he took his life and how he was breaking him, like just working himself down to the ground. And I could see it. And it was 6 months before he died, I bought him that book by Professor Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep. And I don't know, for anyone that wants to improve their sleep, I really, really think you, because it will scare you, because ultimately the shorter you sleep, the quicker you die. I mean, that is the bottom line. And at that time, my brother was sleeping 4.5 hours a night, maybe 5 hours.
Jeez.
And I was like, oh, this cannot continue. Like, you cannot continue like this. And I think, but why? It was being on that treadmill, trying to keep up with that blueprint, but we've got to see that there is another way. And I think one thing I always do with my clients is like, get them to list all the choices that they have available to them right now. Because I think a lot of the time we feel that we've only got one choice, and that's why we stay stuck.
Yeah.
But why don't we just stop, do a bit of self-care and spend some time in solitude, thinking about who you are, why you matter and why you exist, and think about the other choices that we have, because there's many ways to skin a cat, isn't there? And that doesn't mean that one way that's obviously driving us to poor health and stress, to me, kind of doesn't the cost benefit analysis of that is saying to me that ain't worth it. No. I always say to people, what's the point of reaching the top in failing health? You know, well done. You got to the top of your career, but your health is screwed. What are you going to do then?
And that's the thing, that you think, one more day, I'm just going to keep going day to day. It will be worth it because I'm going to make this millions later on. And the fact is, you're never going to do it because you're grinding yourself down to a nub that the person you're trying to emulate hasn't even done it like that. You know, or they've been like Donald Trump, the self-made billionaire, who's not even a billionaire, who had a loan from his father of $1 million. Right. But people are trying to emulate him, acting the way he is, thinking that's how he got who he is. And there's tons of...
I was just about to say, they don't reveal their failures, do they?
And there's tons of stories like that of people where you actually find out what they did and you go, oh, that's not the image they gave. And they're like, yes, because that's the image they sell their courses with. They do. And it's like, when you actually see somebody successful and they go, I did this and this, and you go, oh, right. Well, I'm not going to do that if you had that failures. But you have to fail to learn, to grow and develop. And I mean, I think that could be a podcast on its own. I have to get you back. I mean, I've loved this. I know we're way over time, but sorry for using that.
Thank you so much.
I'd love to do another one and go into depression and really look at that, because that's an area I think would help so many people. But for people who have been listening to this one and taking notes and thinking, I've got to follow you and I've got to do everything, I've signed up with her and work with her and stuff, what would you want them to take from this firstly? And how can we keep in touch with you? You know, how can we sign up to work with you, find your website, etc.?
What do I want them to take from this is, number one, that there is another way. You know, there isn't just one way to live a happy, successful life. Is it really working? And look at the other way. I think the other thing that I want people to take from this is health is wealth. You know, and I don't think we've really got to think about that phrase. And I kind of love it. Health is wealth, because without good health, we don't have anything. You're not going to be able to be there for those kids. You're not going to be able to show up in your role and do that job. So really, we need to be kind of thinking about health at the forefront of anything. And just because you can't see the damage that the stress is doing to you now, it's doing damage. And it's something that you've got to think about. Think about where I said in terms of where you might be in 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, you know, is what you're doing today taking you to a place that, you know, you want to go. And I think in terms of creating change, you know, I think change is scary. You know, growth is scary, and fearlessness doesn't exist. You know, it just doesn't exist. Whenever we're stepping out of our comfort zone, you know, when anything's novel, uncertain, threat to ego, or there's a loss of sense of control, so that's the acronym NUT, is going to feel scary. That's going to initiate a stress response. But I don't think anything is scarier or than staying stuck somewhere you don't belong. So let's pull that, there's always a way to manage that fear. There's always a way to pull apart it. There's always a way to prevent it and to repair it. So don't expect to be fearless when you're making these changes. Don't expect it to be comfortable, because it's not. But just think about the benefits and think, do I want to stay stuck where I am, or is it worth just giving this a go?
I love that. I love when people give messages like that just linger, and you feel the sparks. You can feel that ignition, that change coming, because that's one of those things, that question about that leads you to action without even realizing it. You start thinking about it before you know it. You think, no, I want more from life. Oh, I love that kind of, I can see why you've been so successful. Those kind of questions get to our soul, get to the nucleus of us, rather than, cuts through the bullshit, and you get people to change. Oh, I've got to have you back on. But
Thanks, Ian.
For people then who want to connect, you've got your amazing Instagram, your website's fantastic. How can we, book in a call? Are you taking clients on? Are you going to bring out books? Are you going to do TED Talks? What are you going to do to keep this, like this evolution of your business going? How can we follow this journey you're on?
That's interesting. So yeah, most of my stuff at the moment, my main channel is Instagram, but I've definitely got a message that I want to spread. Let's put it that way. I'd love to write a book, but you know what? What do they say? Don't run before you can walk. So at the moment, I think my main focus is just getting great results for my clients. And, I learn from them. And that's the great thing. It's like they come to me, they're learning from me, and all the time I'm learning from them. In terms of, send me a DM on Instagram. My handle's at Dr. Cordelia Peel. You want to connect with me? It's easy. It's connect@drcordeliapeel.com. You want to book a call with me? Just come, let's have a chat. So I do free 30-minute consultations. We'll just talk about what's going on with you and how I might be able to help. And you can book that through my link tree on Instagram. I am constantly talking to people and connecting with people. And I think Instagram's a great place for me to do that. I'm in my DMs a lot, just sharing kind of experiences with people. And it's funny that the Instagram thing, because when I started this business, I had that limiting belief of you can't build real connection with people through an online platform like that. And now it really, to me, feels like an online community where I'm talking to people about real stuff all the time. And so, come and connect with me, drop me a DM, book a free 30-minute call, send me an email. And I guess watch this space. I love what you're doing, Ian. And like I said, to be invited on a show that is targeting men really is something that is so close to my heart. It couldn't really be better. So thank you so much. And I guess moving forward, a podcast is something that I would love to do. But again, classic perfectionist, try and do too many things at once. And I've done that too much in my life. And I don't want to make myself sick. So we're just slowly building up. The book will come, the podcast will come, but all in good time. It's about the journey, right?
Well, that's it for another week. And thank you for listening. It's now time to take what you've learned and use it to develop and enhance your life with the key points mentioned. Listen, try it, embrace it, use it, and crush it. Now's your time to hit that next level in your life. If you liked this episode, then please leave a comment on the show notes or a review of the show on your podcast platform. Everything helps evolve the show. Until next week, keep seeking the next level in your life.